Frieren and her merry band of heroes, including Himmel, Eisen, and Heider, are off to the city, fresh from their epic "We Just Defeated the Demon King" tour. Once they arrive, the king throws them a party and announces he's going to put up statues of them in the plaza. The gang can't believe their wild ride is over. It only took a decade after all. They share a laugh over past misadventures, like that time Frieren got eaten by a mimic chest or Heider's delusional episodes. Himmel gets sentimental, thanking everyone for the memories. As they're stargazing at the Era meteor shower, Frieren's like, "Meh, it's no biggie for me," and Himmel's like, "Don't ruin the vibe, Frieren." She promises to show him an even better meteor shower in 50 years. Talk about long-term planning. The next day, it's goodbye time at the bridge. Frieren tells the gang she's off to collect spells and wander around for a century or so. Himmel's left wondering what kind of life she'll lead. Flash forward, and we see Frieren on her solo adventures. She tries to buy a shadow dragon horn, but no luck apparently. They're not just lying around in shops. She remembers Himmel finding one back in their Demon King defeating days. 50 years zip by, and Frieren's back in the city, which has changed a ton. She meets Himmel, who's now an old man, and he's like, "You haven't aged a day." He gives her the dragon horn, keeping his word. They plan to watch the meteor shower together. Reunited with Heider and Eisen, Frieren notes that Heider's aged while Eisen, being a dwarf, hasn't changed much. She tells them it'll take a week to get to a prime meteor shower viewing spot, and Himmel's a bit bummed about the journey. But as they travel, he's grateful for one more adventure with the crew. At Himmel's funeral, Heider says Himmel died happy. Frieren overhears people gossiping about her lack of tears, but Heider defends her. Frieren, who's only known Himmel for a decade, finally lets the tears flow, regretting not knowing him better. After the funeral, Heider heads off to the Holy City, making a dark joke about his own mortality. Frieren wonders if he's not afraid of dying, and he's like, "We're legendary heroes, heaven's got to be great." He leaves, encouraging Frieren to keep exploring life. She confides in Eisen about her plans to understand humans better. Eisen turns down Frieren's offer to join her adventures, citing his age. They part ways, and 20 years later, Frieren's lost in the woods near the holy city of Strahl. A purple-haired girl, Fern, finds her and takes her to Heider, who's surprisingly still kicking. Fern, a war orphan, learns that Frieren's been traveling to understand people and is here to repay a debt to Heider. Heider shows Frieren a book with spells of resurrection and immortality, asking her to decipher it. He admits he's now scared of dying and wants Frieren to teach Fern some magic on the side. Frieren agrees after some convincing. Frieren meets Fern for magic lessons. Fern's already got some skills, nearly blasting a rock with a magic beam. Frieren is currently in the midst of teaching Fern the fine art of long-range magic. She points out, with a hint of amusement, over the next 4 years, Frieren juggles between cracking the code of a mysterious grimoire and overseeing Fern's rigorous training, both under her watchful eye and in the solitude of the woods. Whenever Heider pops the question about Fern's progress, Frieren, with a wry smile, reports that Fern is overachieving. Then, in a twist of fate, Heider suddenly finds himself bedridden. He muses, almost jokingly, about his surprisingly long mobility, while Frieren assures him she'll unravel the grimoire's secrets in no time. But Fern, ever the determined student, insists she must master hitting a rock with her magic before Heider's time runs out. A flashback reveals a younger Fern, post-war, and on the brink of a tragic leap off a cliff, halted by an elderly Heider. He shares a tale of a lost friend, a hero who never turned his back on those in need. He sees the same value in Fern's memories. Fern, feeling indebted to Heider for saving her, is convinced that mastering survival skills is the best way to honor his act. Frieren, moved by Fern's resolve, gives her the green light to continue her training while she delves into the grimoire. Eventually, Fern achieves her goal of magic rock target practice just as Frieren finishes with the grimoire. Heider isn't shocked, reasoning that if such magic existed, the sage Uig would have used it. Hyder, nearing his end, suggests Frieren and Fern leave before his passing to spare Fern more loss. But Frieren, emotionally charged, insists on a proper goodbye, filled with memories. Later, Frieren stands atop the cliff where she first met Fern, reflecting on their journey. Hyder's passing comes, and Fern thanks Frieren for the chance to repay her savior, while Frieren honors him with a generous pour of alcohol over his grave. The duo then sets off on their adventure. As they travel, Frieren and Fern take on odd jobs, trading labor for magic spells. They meet a herbalist who offers them information in exchange for cleaning a statue of Himmel. Frieren, while cleaning, reminisces about Himmel's indecision over his statue pose. The herbalist plans to add flowers for a splash of color. Frieren, about to conjure some, recalls Himmel's fondness for the elusive blue moon weed flowers. The herbalist mentions their rarity, but that doesn't deter Frieren. Meanwhile, Fern sneakily stashes seed rats in her robe, planning a forest release. 6 months into the flower hunt, Fern vents her frustration to the herbalist about Frieren's seemingly futile quest. The herbalist hands Fern a bag of related seeds, urging her to share her feelings with Frieren, who sees the world differently. Fern confronts Frieren, who realizes she needs to consider Fern's perspective and promises the search will end soon. Fern's not thrilled with soon, but their conversation is cut short by a seed rat swiping the seed bag, leading them on a chase. Fern questions Frieren's spell collection hobby, to which Frieren responds it's more than just a hobby, inspired by a compliment from a certain fool. They discover a tower, a forgotten stash of seed rats, and at its summit, a sea of blue moon weed flowers, just as Himmel had wished to see with Frieren. Fern, still puzzled by Frieren's love for magic, is gently reminded by Frieren that she chose magic for a reason. Things take a turn for the secretive when Fern catches her mentor, Frieren, sneaking around like a cat in a yarn store. Frieren's mission? To find a birthday gift for Fern. Despite being as old as some hills and twice as wise, deciding to switch gears, Frieren takes Fern on a magical mystery tour of places. First stop, a quaint village where Frieren once played supernatural exterminator by sealing away Qual, the demon of corruption. But here's the kicker. Himmel, ever the diligent one, had been checking on the seal yearly until he shuffled off this mortal coil. He had this unshakable faith that Frieren would swing by for a demon-slaying encore. Back in the day, Frieren could only manage a magical timeout for Qual, not a full-on defeat. Fast forward to the present, and Qual's unsealing turns out to be about as threatening as a kitten in a pillow fort. In the end, Frieren's attempt at birthday shopping might have been a bust, but their adventure proves to be the real gift, complete with demon-slaying action and trips down memory lane. Fern learns that even ancient, powerful elves can be terrible at picking out presents, and Frieren gets a reminder of the enduring trust and friendship she shared with her old companions. In the saga of Frieren, the elf mage with a knack for oversleeping, and her enthusiastic apprentice Fern, we find our duo embarking on a beach cleaning quest. Their reward? A grimoire supposedly penned by the legendary mage Flam. Spoiler alert, it's as genuine as a $3 bill. With brooms and spells at the ready, they scrub a dub their way to New Year's, just in time for the local tradition of watching the first sunrise. Frieren, who could easily win a gold medal in the Sleeping Olympics, had famously missed the sunrise during her last visit, much to her friend's chagrin. This time, though, she manages to witness the anticlimactic event, only to find the sunrise as exciting as watching paint dry. But then, she spots Fern having the time of her life and has an aha moment. The sunrise wasn't about the sun, it was about sharing the moment with friends. Next up, they drop in on Eisen, Frieren's old buddy, who they haven't seen in a cool 30 years. Eisen, ever the seeker of magical lore, ropes them into hunting for the real-deal Flam grimoire in Val Basin. Why? Because this one supposedly has the cheat code for chatting with the dead. Eisen thinks it might be nice for Frieren to have a chinwag with Himmel one more time. Frieren then drops a history bomb, Flam was her mentor a millennium ago and had once told her to seek her home if she ever wanted to have a heart-to-heart with those who've moved on to the afterlife. Lo and behold, they find the authentic grimoire, which turns out to be more of a cosmic GPS pointing to Oriole at the continent's northern tip, conveniently located at the Demon Lord's old digs. On their way back, Eisen, now a wise old sage with more years than a giant redwood, gives Frieren a pat on the back for finally learning to care about others and for being a decent mentor to Fern. Frieren, struck by a bout of wanderlust, invites Eisen to join them on their next escapade to Oriole. Eisen, citing his "I'm too old for this stuff" clause, politely declines. But he does drop a nostalgic bomb, reminding them that their original quest to the Demon King's castle was a decade-long road trip. In the end, Frieren and Fern are left to ponder the journey ahead, with Frieren likely wondering if there's an espresso machine at the northernmost point of the continent to help with those early sunrises. Eisen, content with his role as the wise mentor who doesn't go on field trips, watches them go, probably thinking, "Kids these days, always off to talk to the dead or clean beaches for counterfeit books." Time is a bit of a sticky wicket in the perilous world of Frieren and her plucky apprentice Fern. Frieren, who's been around the block or several continents for centuries, casually notes that a decade-long journey might be a mere 10% of Fern's lifespan. Fern, unfazed by the prospect of spending a good chunk of her life on the road, decides to tag along with the enthusiasm of a kid in a candy store. Their journey soon leads them to a village with a ghost problem. And not the friendly Casper type either. The villagers have been playing disappearing acts after encountering apparitions of their dearly departed. Frieren sniffs out the work of an Einsam, a monster with a flair for illusion magic and a taste for the dramatic. The Einsam's trick? Conjuring ghostly illusions of loved ones, which is sort of like emotional blackmail with a magical twist. The catch with these spectral shenanigans is that dispelling the illusions requires attacking them, and let's face it, swinging a sword at ghostly grandma isn't everyone's cup of tea. Even the toughest warriors find it hard to battle these phantasmal figures. Fern herself nearly falls for the ruse, coming face to face with an illusion of Hyder. But Frieren, in a display of her practical, if slightly cold-hearted approach, promptly blasts an apparition of Himmel, unmasking the Einsam and setting Fern up for the monster's slaying home run. With the ghostly mystery solved, Frieren, ever the collector of magical tomes, sets her sights on a dragon's grimoire. But this isn't just any dragon. It's one that's had a staring contest with Stark, one of Eisen's students, and lost. They find Stark, who confesses that his victory in the dragon stare down was less about bravery and more about being scared stiff. Literally. Frieren, possibly questioning her life choices, gives him until dawn to decide if he's up for round 2 with the dragon. Fern, ever the voice of reason, expresses her doubts about Stark's dragon-slaying abilities. Frieren, however, is optimistic. Thanks to Eisen's training, Stark can apparently slice through rock like it's butter. Whether he can apply those skills to a dragon without freezing up again is another story. Fern, the ever-curious and somewhat fearless, asks Stark why he kept up with his training if he had no intention of going toe-to-toe with the village's scaly problem. Stark, leaning on his sword like it was an old broom, confessed that while the villagers saw him as their savior, he secretly dreamed of sprinting in the opposite direction at the first sign of trouble. He even revealed that his most heroic scar, the one on his forehead, was actually the result of a heated debate with his master Eisen over his distinct lack of enthusiasm for monster fighting. Stark's training was less about defeating monsters and more about trying to not disappoint Eisen. Fern, inspecting Stark's calloused hands, realized the man had indeed trained hard, even if his heart wasn't in it. She shared her own tale of monster fighting terror, a story involving running away from her first beastly opponent. It was only when she finally faced her fear that her body took over, and she emerged victorious. Fern believed in Stark's resolve to protect the village, even if Stark himself didn't. The following day, as Fern and her friend Frieren were about to play a rather extreme game of tag with the dragon, Stark made a dramatic entrance. he made Frieren promise to finish off the dragon should he fall in battle. Stark's sense of time was a bit skewed, considering 3 years in the village as an eternity, much to Frieren's amusement. As they approached the dragon, Stark's hands began their involuntary shake, rattle, and roll routine. Frieren couldn't help but chuckle, recalling a similar incident with Eisen, who had admitted that fear was his constant companion during his heroic escapades. Stark found some comfort in these words, perhaps realizing that even heroes get the jitters. In the face-off with the dragon, Stark proved his mettle by delivering a decisive blow. However, in his panic, he yelled at Frieren and Fern to keep attacking, only to be told by Frieren, the stinking hag, that the dragon was already history. Frieren's praise and subsequent dragon's nest looting brought a smile to Stark's face, reminding him of Eisen's stories about Frieren's unique contribution to their adventures. Fast forward to the present, Stark, Frieren, and Fern find themselves in Wall, a fortress city near Regal Canyon. Stark nostalgically orders a jumbo berry special at a bar, a dish he once shared with his master. Fern, popping up in the same bar, is relieved when Stark shows no interest in a prolonged stay in Wall. Determined to find a way past the barrier, Stark suggests consulting the black market and the Thieves' Guild, showing a surprising enthusiasm for getting out of the city. He reveals to Fern his desire to make the most of his journey with Frieren and Fern, hoping to bring back stories to share with Eisen, who is now too old for such adventures. Their plans take an unexpected turn when the captain of the guard and the castellan of Wall grant them passage through the barrier, recognizing Frieren's intent to quell the conflicts in the north. With the barrier now open, the trio sets off on their journey, much like Eisen and his party did years ago. As Frieren and her merry band venture northward, Frieren drops some elf trivia. The elven race is dwindling because, apparently, living for eons makes them too blasé to bother with the birds and the bees. It's like having eternity at your disposal makes you procrastinate on everything, even reproduction. Passing through a village, they stumble upon statues of Frieren and her original gang. These aren't just any statues, they're part of Liberation Day celebrations. Frieren reminisces about a time when Himmel insisted they leave behind statues as proof of their existence. He was worried they might fade into myth, like a band that only ever released one great album. Next up, they hit another city where Frieren spots demons and leaps into action. But in a twist that would make a sitcom writer proud, she's promptly arrested by the city guards. Why? Because attacking peace envoys, even demonic ones, is a big no-no. Fern and Stark visit Frieren in the city's least welcoming guest, Sweet the Dungeon, to explain the situation. Aura, one of the Demon Lord's lieutenants, has been at war with the city for 28 years, and now peace talks are on the table. Frieren, ever the skeptic, warns that demons learning human language is like a cat learning to open the fridge, it's only for their benefit. Sure enough, the demon peace envoy, led by the aptly named Lugner, which, fun fact, means liar in German, is just a ruse to lower the city's defenses for an attack. But wait, there's more. One of Lugner's minions, Drat, decides it's a good idea to try and assassinate Frieren in her cell. Frieren, with the calmness of someone who's seen more plot twists than a long-running soap opera, casually informs Drat that she's leagues more powerful than Aura. It's like telling someone who brought a knife to a gunfight that they're actually in a missile launch facility. As Frieren, Fern, and Stark navigate this web of deception and dungeon diplomacy, they probably can't help but think that sometimes the journey north feels more like stumbling through a fantasy-themed reality show. Frieren finds herself in a classic dungeon predicament. Drat, the would-be assassin with a plan as thin as his understanding of Frieren's power, launches an attack. Frieren, in response, dispatches him with the ease of swatting a particularly bothersome fly, and then makes her grand escape from the dungeon, probably wondering if all her adversaries shop at the same inept villain supply store. Meanwhile, up in the city, Graf Granat is scratching his head over Drat's mysterious vanishing act and Frieren's Houdini impression. He confronts Lugner, whose plan unravels faster than a cheap sweater. Lugner, in a desperate attempt to save face, captures Granat with the brilliant plan of using him to disable the city's barrier. Enter Frieren and Stark, our intrepid sidekicks, who decide to warn Granat about Lugner's dastardly scheme. But who should they bump into but Frieren herself? Frieren, in a move that screams tough love, refuses to lend a hand against Lugner. She's like that parent who watches you struggle to open a jar, insisting it'll build character. Instead, she's off to have a chat with Aura, who's conveniently loitering outside the city with her own personal demon army. That night, Frieren and Stark channel their inner ninjas and sneak into the keep, managing to land some solid hits on Lugner. Unfortunately, Granat's in a bit of a pickle, so they opt to play the heroes and whisk him away to safety. Lugner, nursing his wounds, finally puts two and two together and realizes that Frieren, the notorious Frieren the Slayer, a name probably given by the same people who thought Big Ben was a clever name for a large bell, is in town. Outside the city, Frieren and Aura finally come face to face. It's the kind of showdown that you'd expect dramatic lightning and thunder for, but sadly, the weather doesn't always cooperate with epic fantasy battles. In the thrilling saga of Frieren and her dynamic duo, Frieren and Stark, the plot thickens faster than a potion in a cauldron. Having whisked Granat to the safety of the local church, which is now doubling as a makeshift sanctuary-cum-strategy room, they learn about Aura's ace up the sleeve, the Scales of Obedience. This magical artifact sounds like it belongs in a high-stakes magical baking show, measuring mana instead of flour. Whoever tips the scales can essentially puppeteer the loser, explaining Aura's unnervingly loyal army. Meanwhile, Frieren, in a display of her typical no-nonsense approach, is out there dismantling Aura's puppet collection. Observing Aura's glaring lack of empathy, Frieren concludes that she can be dealt with like any garden variety monster. It's like realizing the scary monster under your bed is just a pile of laundry. Back in the city, the plot takes a turn worthy of a daytime soap opera. Frieren and Stark are ambushed by Lugner and his assistant Linny. It's a classic case of demons crashing a party uninvited. Initially, it looks like our heroes are in a pickle, but then Stark has his light bulb moment. He realizes Linny has been copying Eisen's fighting style, probably because originality isn't a strong suit among demons. In a move that might make Eisen proud or facepalm, Stark takes a hit from Linny's axe on purpose, setting himself up for a dramatic, if not slightly reckless, killing blow. Frieren, not to be outdone in heroics, decides it's her turn to shine. Her trump card? Casting spells faster than Frieren on a caffeine rush. She overwhelms Lugner's defenses in a dazzling display of magical prowess, making it clear that underestimating her is about as smart as a goblin trying to outwit a wizard. In the grand tapestry of Frieren's adventures, we find ourselves at a pivotal moment. Lugner, now more holy than holy, lies mortally wounded. In his final moments, he's piecing together the puzzle of Frieren's surprising strength. He realizes, with a mix of awe and a hint of "I should have seen this coming," that Frieren has been playing the magical equivalent of Possum. She's been suppressing her mana, a move that in mage circles is about as taboo as wearing socks with sandals. With Lugner's curiosity satisfied, but his life not so much, Frieren delivers the final blow. Cut to 1,000 years earlier in a scene reminiscent of a tragic opera, where Flam stumbles upon a decimated elf village. There, amidst the ruins, is Frieren, the sole survivor and slayer of a demon general. Flam, in a move that's part rescue, part talent scout, decides Frieren is apprentice material and takes her under her wing. Flam's training regimen includes mana suppression, a skill as rare as a dragon's dental appointment. She also imparts the art of demon slaying. Flam reveals that demons, much like overconfident peacocks, can't suppress their mana, making them easy to dupe into a false sense of security. It's like bringing a knife to a gunfight, but the gun is actually a clever illusion. Back in the present, Aura, armed with the Scales of Obedience, is all set for her showdown with Frieren. But when Frieren reveals her true mana level, Aura's face probably mimics that of someone who's just realized they've brought a rubber sword to a dragon fight. Frieren, turning the scales quite literally on Aura, forces her to perform the world's most unwilling self-beheading. As Aura meets her grim end, one can't help but reflect on the journey Frieren has undertaken. After giving Aura's victims the send-off they deserve and basking in Granat's generous hospitality, which probably involved more roasted meats and toasts than Frieren's elf stomach was prepared for, our intrepid group sets off once again. Their next stop? Oberst, a city so magically inclined that they probably use spells instead of Google Maps. The goal is to snag a first-class mage certification, but as luck or the lack thereof would have it, they find themselves in the middle of a blizzard at the foot of the Schwer Mountains. Stark, who apparently didn't pack his thermal underwear, starts to show signs of hypothermia. Just when things look bleak, like a scene out of a frostbitten fairy tale, they stumble upon an emergency cabin. There, they meet Kraft, an elven monk who's more isolated than a hermit on a deserted island. For 6 months, yes, 6 they hunker down with Kraft, turning the cabin into a makeshift home. One imagines Frieren passing the time by playing endless rounds of magical charades, while Fern probably wonders if she'll ever feel her toes again. Kraft, in a moment of vulnerability, shares his life story. With all his old buddies long gone, and his achievements collecting dust in the annals of history, he's banking on the goddess to give him a heavenly high five when he gets to the afterlife. He offers to sing Frieren's praises to the goddess, but Frieren, in a moment that's part sentimental, part thanks, but no thanks, declines. She's already had her share of praise, courtesy of Hyder. As they part ways with Kraft, who's probably relieved to have his cabin back to himself, the group continues their journey. As Frieren and her motley crew journey towards Oberst, they make a pit stop at the Village of the Sword. This village is home to the hero's sword, a legendary blade that's still stuck in a stone, much like a medieval version of a wet paint sign that everyone ignores. Frieren has the unenviable task of monster pest control here, as the sword seems to be a monster magnet. Stark is puzzled by the sight of the hero's sword, still lodged firmly in its stony sheath. He's grown up on tales of Himmel, heroically yanking it out, as one does with legendary swords. Frieren, in her usual no-nonsense manner, clarifies that Himmel indeed gave the sword a good tug, but to no avail. The stories, however, got a bit embellished. Himmel, unfazed by this literal setback, declared he'd just have to beat the demon lord without it. It's like saying, "Who needs a sword anyway?" with heroic bravado. Next, the gang lands in another town where Fern discovers it's Stark's 18th birthday. Stark, coming from a family that considered birthdays less important than a good battle cry, isn't used to the fuss. He shares a bit of his backstory, revealing his family labeled him a coward for running away from a monster attack. Fern, playing the role of birthday fairy godmother, reassures Stark and helps him pick out a silver bracelet, because nothing says happy birthday like shiny wrist accessories. Back at the inn, Frieren has donned her chef's hat, whipping up Hamburg steaks in honor of Stark's birthday. As they celebrate Stark's birthday, complete with improvised culinary delights and new bling, our adventurers are not just marking a year in Stark's life. They're weaving new threads of camaraderie and understanding into their journey's tapestry.